going on, everybody? You're tuned into the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Let's get into this book. This episode, we're going to do Laws 15 and 16. Law 15 says, crush your enemy totally. The judgment is, all great leaders since Moses have known that a feared enemy must be crushed completely. Sometimes they've learned this the hard way. If one ember is left to light, no matter how dimly it smolders, a fire will eventually break out. More is lost through stopping halfway than through total annihilation. The enemy will recover and will seek revenge. Crush him, not only in body, but in spirit.
Okay, well, in early Chinese history, there was a king of Chu who wanted to invade another kingdom called Qin. And he sent one guy, his name was He Song Yu, with this other guy whose name was Song Yi to the north, and he sent another guy called Lu Peng to the south. From here on out, I'm just going to refer to them by their surnames because their names are really complicated.
Yeah.
So anyway, Yu and Yi were up north and engaging in the campaign up there, and Yi, for some reason, hesitated in attacking an incoming army, and Yu was annoyed with this, and I think this was the last straw for Yu, and he actually decapitated Yi when he had the chance to, and took over that army. And Yu also was really jealous of Pang, because Pang was heading south to capture a very important city for Qin, right? And so he wanted to get there first and get the glory for himself. Mm-hmm. Well, he went for it, but he didn't get there in time, and Pang had already taken this city. So one of Yu's advisors advised him to lure Pang into a trap where they could execute him, and then Yu could take control of his army, and actually ended up being the head of all the armies for the kingdom of Chu. And so, Pang took the bait because, as it turns out, Pang and Yu were good friends. And Pang was like, cool, my buddy's inviting me to this, this banquet. This will be great. So, though after a while, Pang is beginning to notice that something's not quite right, and eventually escapes before he's executed because Yu hesitated in carrying out the execution. And Pang was heavily outnumbered, and being a very practical person, he was not going to put up a fight when the odds were that big against him.
Yeah.
So he retreated with his army, and Yu gave chase to him and chased him for quite some time until he finally caught him. And Pang, decided that he would beg for mercy. And Yu's advisor told him, no, you should really execute this guy. But Yu decided to be merciful, and sure enough, Pang escaped, and Yu had to give chase again, and eventually this all came to a head when Pang finally got the upper hand and managed to decimate a majority of Yu's army. And this time around, now that Pang had the upper hand and Yu was being pursued, Pang wasn't taking any chances, and he put out a bounty for Yu's head. And when Yu came to realize this, Yu took his own life.
Yeah.
So, and Pang ended up becoming head of the armies, and actually eventually ended up running the kingdom, because I think he took power from the king of Chu, and he started the Han dynasty.
Yeah. It was actually very successful for many years.
Oh, yeah. It's one of the longest dynasties in Chinese history.
Mm-hmm.
That was the transgression of the law. The observance was this woman named Wu. She was an empress, the daughter of a duke, and it was customary at this time in Chinese history. This is, by the way, sometime after the events of the story I told previously. It was customary for daughters of dukes and noblemen to become concubines in the emperor's court. And she in particular won favor of the emperor's son. But when the emperor died, again, it was customary that these concubines would be sent to a Buddhist convent where they would live out the rest of their lives. Wu was not keen on this idea, but she maintained her close friendship with the emperor's son and later on his new wife, and they managed to get her out of this convent after 7 years. Mm-hmm. And there was a bit of a problem with the empress, and it was the fact that she couldn't bear children. So she really did not mind that Wu was sleeping with the emperor because, somebody had to produce an heir for the throne, right? Yeah. So, and sure enough, Wu got pregnant, and after she had given birth, the empress came to her home to visit the child. And when the empress left, Wu smothered the child and killed it and blamed the death on the empress. And everyone believed Wu, and the empress was put to death. And then Wu ended up marrying the emperor. And after the emperor got married to Wu, he lost interest in being the emperor and just wanted to engage in courtly delights, yeah. Right? And so Wu ended up kind of basically running the show for the most part, and she went through a lot of means to maintain her power. There was a niece that really fancied the emperor, and the emperor really fancied, and that kind of threatened Wu's position. So she had her poisoned. She killed the oldest heir, banished the other heir, and then charges. A bunch of stuff until she got to the youngest heir, who was really incompetent, and basically she ruled through him. And I'm not sure what happened to him because he eventually leaves the picture too. Yeah. I'm not sure if she had him killed or banished or what happened, but she ends up becoming the sole ruler of this kingdom after the emperor dies, and for like 10 years, and even gets this ridiculous name of Holy and Divine Emperor of China, and claims to be a divine descendant of the Buddha. Yeah. And anyway, she remained the sole ruler until she was 80, until she was finally forced to abdicate. And bear in mind, like, a lot of people were trying to stage a coup against her, but she's somehow managed to find them out and prevent that from happening.
I think it's very interesting, the interpretations of both of those stories. The first one, they kind of brought out two different aspects of this law. The very first one is Xiang Yu and Liu Peng's law. I think it kind of highlighted that power is a game of victory. Either you win it totally or you get bested totally. But that's the law, and there's not much straying from that. So I think for Xiang Yu and Liu Peng, what their conflict is there was more involved in just victory. I think Yu wanted some sort of recognition from Peng that he was superior, which is why every time he caught him and he was really about to get victory over him, he didn't fully go for it, because I feel like he wanted some sort of reaction based on how their relationship was. And so because of that pretty much led to his downfall. He was kind of going past the mark of victory.
Which is a law in of itself.
Absolutely.
47, which we'll get to when we have our very last episode.
Absolutely, yeah. Law 47, which is don't go past your mark in victory. Know where you want to go, and then don't exceed that. And I feel like that's what he was trying to do. Mm-hmm. I think there's more involved in their relationship. It was very complex. And maybe he had some sort of insecurity about how he thought Peng was maybe better than him in some way or another. But because he didn't obey that law like that, and he was kind of going past it, I think that's kind of what led to his downfall, which is kind of a cautionary tale in that.
He went and destroy Peng and the chance that he had.
Yeah.
He had 2 chances.
2 whole chances.
Yeah.
And both times he either, I guess he might have either been maybe felt bad for him, didn't want to be so harsh on him, but on another instance he said that he wanted his former, or in the book mentioned that he wanted his former friend to acknowledge him as master. So there's obviously a lot more going on there.
Yeah.
I think what that story was really highlighting is the law is simply power is the game of victory. You either win or someone will beat you. You lose. I feel like Empress Wu's story, the interpretation for that was more. It really highlighted Empress Wu's proactivity. There, the main thing that she was trying to do is she knew that she was going to have enemies based on the position that she had and what she wanted to accomplish. Like, she was out for power and she wanted to be the queen, and so she did everything she could for that. Now, because she was in that situation, she inspired a lot of enemies. She stirred up a lot of enemies, and those enemies were naturally going to resist her, and were going to try to get their footing in there, and they wanted their rule also. So what she did is she didn't wait for them to get power so that they could rival them. She cut off the head immediately, and so in the keys of power, what they mentioned is there are always going to be people that you can't win over, people who personally hate you, people who are just natural enemies based on your position, and that's simply the cost of doing business. So the approach, like Wu's, should be either in a real life context. I mean, it's not good to go out and murder people or whatever, go to the lengths that she did, but it's more about just kind of weakening them and maybe banishing them from I guess in the context of the book is really banishing them from your court, but I guess not having them around you, or not to pay any attention to whatever tactics they might have, where they try to they maybe try to feign friendliness or anything like that. So I think Empress Wu's story really just highlighted proactivity and just knowledge of enemies springing up and combating that, and that's what led to her success in a way.
It's very difficult to apply this law in an everyday life situation, because if you grow up to be a mature adult, you generally don't have enemies.
Yeah.
That's kind of something that ends when you're in middle school or, God forbid, high school.
Yeah.
But I guess there are instances where that could happen, especially in business. If you have one company that's just committed to bringing your company down, then you kind of have to meet might with might and eliminate them in your own way. I think it is applicable on a geopolitical scale, though. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think our country has experienced that with the war in Iraq. When we went in, we overthrew Saddam Hussein and then replaced him with this provisional government, but we didn't stay there long enough to see that all the way through. When we pulled out, and when ISIS gained power in parts of Syria, they were able to sweep through northern Iraq and just blow right through this poorly trained Iraqi army.
Yeah.
And it's only until the end of last year in 2017 that the remnants of ISIS were expelled from Iraq, and it really remains to be seen how long that will hold.
And it's actually, and there's an argument that could be made that ISIS was at their height, they were a lot more vicious and a lot more ruthless than Al Qaeda back then, or any other kind of terrorist network.
They're actually enemies with Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
Al Qaeda actually doesn't like them. Just give you an idea of how messed up ISIS is. Even Al Qaeda thinks they're too far.
Exactly. Yeah. And they use new methods too. They're able to get up on the social media side of it. It was really a monster that we had never seen, I think, up to that point.
Yeah. It's crazy. On the flip side, though, again, the Americans used this in World War II when we dropped bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan, and that contributed to an early end to the war. And some people will debate me on this, but it probably was the most humanitarian thing you could have done, because otherwise you would have had millions of Americans and Japanese, die as the war continued. Because to get to Tokyo, you would have had to go through a very determined Japanese army and citizens too, who were raised from little on to die honorably for your country.
Yeah.
That could be a debate, and both sides could definitely have their arguments, but
Yeah.
be that as it may, it's not really the scope of this particular conversation. The point really is that after we dropped the bombs on Japan, we didn't just leave them to smolder and be like, all right, your problem,
Yeah.
If we had done that, the Japanese would probably remain our enemies to this day.
Absolutely.
But what we did instead is we went back in and we helped rebuild their country, and nowadays our countries are very close allies and trade partners. And so I think you could probably add a caveat to this law that if you do destroy your enemy completely, fine, but you could also give a measure of some mercy and aid at the end, and you might actually end up acquiring an ally.
Yeah.
It's possible. I mean, you got to keep tabs on them.
Yeah.
Or I mean, I'm kind of jumping to the reversal and saying that, but
maybe keep a little bit of distance.
Sure.
With their relationship, yeah. And that's actually that actually ties pretty well into law 2, which is using your enemies, I guess more than your friends, or using your enemies as your friends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an enemy that, like an enemy of yours where where they stand. That they don't necessarily want anything from you, or they're honest about what they want from you. You can actually use them better than you would your friends who try to maybe not be as open about the things that they want from you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right about there being limited, I think, real world applications to this. The only one that I can think of would be maybe in corporate America. Someone coming up trying to, we hear the stories of ruthless people working on Wall Street or just, who are trying to come up and become the, climb the corporate ladder. I think I can, I think it's possible to have someone trying to do that and have many competitors also who want that same spot that he wants. So he kind of has to combat all those other people also and really destroy them in order to reach the pinnacle, I guess, of corporate America.
Yeah. I think we kind of reached a consensus early. You want to jump the reversal?
Yeah, let's do
jump
this
to
thing.
The reversal?
The reversal of this law pretty much says that in some cases it's better to let your enemy destroy themselves than for them to suffer by your hand. If you're in a position where you don't necessarily have to do anything to destroy your enemy totally, you might as well just let them destroy themselves instead of you going in there and maybe looking like the bad guy or anything like that, especially if they're on their last leg. And then when you have an enemy on the ropes and they're on the last leg, sometimes it's good to just let them it's good for them it's good for you to just let them destroy themselves. In other cases, after crushing your enemy, they plan it can get emboldened years later, and if that's the case, you have to crush them again. So there's certainly certain instances where you crush your enemy totally, short of completely destroying them, like killing them or whatever, especially in the war context. And let's say over the years they get emboldened again and they form up some sort of other army, I guess, to attack you again. It's the reversal of this is pretty much just saying that if you're in a position where it's kind of impossible to completely destroy them, just keep destroying them totally. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Or again, like I was saying with the example of Japanese, give them a reason to remain friendly to you. Actually, very much like when that Mongol king.
Genghis Khan.
No, not Genghis Khan. We talked about him in an earlier podcast. I can't remember it. His name escapes me right now. But when he, wherever there was it was in China. There was a Warring States period, and this general won, basically the war, and basically being king of this area was, had a very low life expectancy, and he kind of did a different tactic in which he awarded his rivaling generals some land, and that appeased them, and they had no reason to overthrow him. It's kind of like that
for Law 2.
I think we kind of did the same thing with Japan, and that's why I don't think they have the intention of ever retaliating against us for what we did during World War II. And also, let bygones be bygones. Unless, of course, they're just biding their time.
Yeah, that's always the exception.
Which,
has been a long time.
That's why you got to keep tabs on your allies as well as everybody else in the world. And that's true for, our other allies as well, not just Japan. And I really hope they're not, because I really like Saki and Godzilla.
And Godzilla. I think the thing with Law 2 was also that their needs were met, right? So one, their needs were met, and two, they I think the enemies knew to what lengths, and I think this applies for Japan also. The enemies knew to what lengths the king would go to if they were to, start anything, right? So with the two bombs that the Americans hit the Japanese with, they kind of know the lengths that So they know that it can be pretty easy for them to, I guess, get destroyed that way. And if this country is giving us a helping hand, they're kind of we're meeting our needs. So why ruin that?
Yeah, and as time goes on, it's now the generations have separated this conflict, and now we just trade Hello Kitty for pop music, and we're good.
There you go.
Absolutely. Shall we jump into Law 16?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do this thing. Let's jump right into Law number 16. Law 16 says, use absence to increase respect and honor. The judgment is, too much circulation makes the price go down. The more you are seen and heard from, the more common you appear. If you are already established in a group, temporary withdrawal from it will make you more talked about, even more admired. You must learn when to leave. Create value through scarcity.
All right. Well, the Median Empire actually grew out of the Assyrian Empire. There was this region actually rebelled against the Assyrians, and when they won their little war of independence, so to speak, they were not really keen on having an imperial structure or a king. They wanted to have basically a democracy or some kind of representative government. But the Medians weren't really all that well organized, and they had a hard time figuring out exactly what form of government they wanted. So it was basically anarchy. And as a result, a lot of crimes were being committed, a lot of business deals were not being seen through, and all kinds of issues that happen when you have a lawless state. So a lot of people would go from the villages all over Medea, that would go to this one guy. His name was Diocese. And everyone went to him because he was a very well-respected magistrate. He had a reputation for, being very even-keeled in his judgments. And it got to the point where pretty much everybody was going to Diocese for their grievances. And Diocese, after a while, as you might well imagine, was getting worn down by this. And after a while, he said, you know what, I'm retiring. This is exhausting me. And when he retired from being a magistrate, Medea fell into even more chaos. And so all the tribal leaders got together, and they decided, okay, clearly we need to have a king because we are very disorganized. But who should be our king? And everyone unanimously agreed that it should be Diocese. So they convinced Diocese to, be king of the Medians. And a diocese agreed under the condition that he be well guarded and lived in a secluded palace, which makes sense, and that a new capital was built, to run the empire's business. And communications with him would be by messenger only, and no one in the royal court could see him more than once a week, and even then by permission. So he intentionally created this, made himself scarce from the public view as much as possible. And this kind of create a mythical image around Diocese, and he was larger than life kind of a thing. And, that worked out well for him, and the Median Empire later became what some people would call the Persian Empire, or other people might call the Achaemenid Empire, and his grandson was Cyrus the Great.
Oh, yeah.
Which, if you know anything about history, you know who Cyrus is. If you've ever read the Bible, you know who Cyrus is.
Yeah,
so,
definitely. I think I'm a big fan of this law. I think it has immense application. I think it's something that, you could just see just out, out in the world. Lots of examples. So the very first one I kind of picked up on is we've seen musicians employ this directly and indirectly. Like talking specifically, I'm a big fan of hip hop and things like that. So, for anyone who's in the know about kind of hip hop artists and stuff, obviously, Tupac and Biggie, they were murdered, but they, in a way, if as a person who was I was fairly young when they died, but I can kind of tell from when they were living to after they died, they became really iconic. It became, while they were alive and they were making music, I feel like people, they just kind of assumed, oh, these people are gonna be here making music, so no one really was, really Biggie was hated by an entire half of the country, really, for the things he said, and the same for Tupac. After they died, it really raised their, people just became enamored with them because obviously they weren't going to make music anymore. They weren't alive, so they were scarce. You can kind of see this too with some of the current rappers like a J. Cole or Kendrick Lamar, who makes an album one year and then they stay completely out of the limelight. You could also see that in pop music, with some of the artists as well.
Yeah, Adele was one of those.
Adele does that a lot, where she just comes in, she releases some music, everyone loves it, then she disappears.
Mm-hmm.
You also see this in other areas. So Jerry Seinfeld's a comedian. He had a TV show. It was doing great. At the height of the TV show, he decided to end it. And, because he was on top and he left the show and people still love it to this day. The sales for Seinfeld are still, unbelievable. You've seen TV shows like Family Guy where when it was on, when it first came out, no one really watched it. And the show got canceled. People started buying the DVDs and they fell in love with it. The same thing with Arrested Development. You've seen actors like Daniel Day-Lewis, who, prolific actor, he goes out, he makes a movie, he completely disappears into the shadows. He goes to like Europe and actually has like a menial job out there just because. And then he comes out, does another movie. So that kind of increases his, how people see him. When you're not around, and you're not really giving people anything, they really make it up in their head. So you become more of an icon. You become more of a mythic figure because of that. But I think it's something that you could see out in pop culture all the time, whether artists are doing that directly or indirectly. It's something that has an effect.
Yeah, I think especially in the pop culture realm, the actors and musicians who are on shows all the time, like people get annoyed with them after a while.
Absolutely,
because it's like usually they're pretty ridiculous people though, and so people are annoyed with them for other reasons. But I think it's also too, it's like it's too much of a good thing.
Yeah,
you could say. If you pizza's great, but if you have pizza every single day, you get sick and tired of pizza.
I hate pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to clarify one thing about this law, and that I think it's different than isolating yourself. Next week we'll be talking about Law 18 rather, which warns about isolating yourself.
Yeah, creating fortresses.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to remove yourself completely where you end up losing, information on what's going on in the current environment.
Yeah.
You want to still be in the know, but you just don't want to plaster yourself everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like car ads. Like, I think the most effective car ads are ones that are run by like Subaru, where it's like more mellow music.
Yeah.
And they're kind of creating more of an atmosphere instead of like your local car commercials that are just loud and obnoxious.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know about you, Rudy, but me personally as a consumer, if I see a car commercial that's really obnoxious, it makes me not want to buy from that car company.
I'm the same way.
Or and it's not just cars, it's anything.
Yeah.
Anytime but anybody has an obnoxious commercial, I don't want to buy from them.
Yeah.
Just because they annoy me. And I can only assume that if your commercial is annoying, then you must be annoying and probably a shyster.
Yeah.
So I think that idea is worth bearing in mind if you're into marketing or advertising, or if you run a company.
Yeah, I think so too. Another law though that comes to mind is Law 6, which is about standing out from the crowd. And I feel like the difference with that law and this, because if you're a car dealer and you want people to know who you are, I understand you going out there and making an obnoxious commercial, so people, so people would know what your car dealer is. But I think for this law, it starts off with assuming that you've gotten a considerable amount of power already. Assuming that people know who you are already, which we're going to talk about later in the reversal. But I think if you have no power, if people don't know who you are, it's useful to be kind of that obnoxious voice, so people get to know who you are. But once you've done that already, it's pointless to keep doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think we were talking about musicians earlier. I think Adele definitely did that when she released. Was it 21? That's the one that has Rolling in the Deep in it, I think
so, yeah.
Yeah. She was everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing Adele, right?
Yeah.
But then she like disappeared for a couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then she just randomly dropped that song Hello.
With Hello in it.
And a couple weeks later the album came out that went with it. And like very little press behind it, and that was a couple of years ago, and
I haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard anything from her, and even when she was out and about, you still didn't really hear that much from her.
No.
I mean, you heard her music, but her personally, not so much.
No.
So, and I think she's definitely following this law, whether she's intending to or not, or even read the book or not.
Yeah. Maybe your team has.
I'm sure that's definitely true. But she's following it insofar as she's not plastering herself everywhere because she doesn't need to. And you know what? If you don't need to do it, then don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's just to kind of touch on this, there's also further applications with, I think with economics is pretty obvious. I mean, the supply and demand, the concept of that, where the more of something that you have out there, the less of the demand is, the less of supply you have, the more the demand is.
Yeah.
And that's more or less pretty self-evident. But I think another application of this is in seduction, and Robert Greene talked about it in the book for a little bit too, about just the process of courting. So,
that crazy story. You want me to tell that story?
Yeah, I guess we could touch on it for a little bit.
We got time. This is why I hate courtly love. If our modern listeners may not know what courtly love is, but it was something that was rampant in medieval period. In the medieval period,
Yeah, back in the day.
Back in the day. I think you saw a version of it in the Victorian age too.
Mm-hmm.
A big variation on it, but a version of it. So, okay, basically, I'm just going to talk to you all very frank. So this guy was a troubadour, and for anyone who's like, what the heck is a troubadour? Troubadour is basically a traveling musician or actor or jester or whatever. And he was traveling around and playing at all these castles and whatnot. And for some reason, his best friend tagged along. I don't know why. I don't think his friend was in the. I don't think his friend was in the show. I think he just was like a bum and just went with him. And his buddy, both him and his buddy, ended up meeting some ladies that they fancied, right? And they got into a relationship. Well, his buddy and his lady got into this big fight, right? And at the end of it, they kind of broke it off for a little bit, but when they came back together, that reconciliation made their love deeper, according to this guy. And so, he was telling this troubadour about this, and the troubadour was like, "Oh man, I want to experience that." So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to intentionally make my lady mad at me, and then we can have this reconciliation, and our love will be sweet, 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 right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is stupid, but okay, fine. Let's see where
Not
this
well
goes.
thought out.
No, not at all. So he proceeds to just blatantly ignore his lady friend, and she sends messengers and messages to him, trying to figure out, what did I say to make you act this way? You like my impression of her?
Oh, that's a great. Yeah, I can picture her right now.
I'm channeling my inner medieval lady. So anyway, so he continues to ignore her, and then after a while, he's like, "All right, I think, it's ready. I think this cake's ready to come out of the oven, right?"
Yeah.
So he goes over to her wherever she's staying, and she just like falls at her knees rather, and is like, "I don't know what I did to make you mad at me, but please come back to me." And he's thinking like, "Damn, this hasn't worked yet. I'm gonna have to ignore her. I'm gonna have to really bring down the hammer." And so he just starts berating this chick.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Get away from me. I never want to see you again." So he does, and stays away for some time, and then he goes, "Okay, I think now the cake's ready to come out."
Now it's really ready.
Now it's really ready.
Yeah. Preheat was on before.
I forgot that. I forgot to preheat the oven.
Yeah.
Now it's ready. Here we go. So he goes over to where she's staying, and her handmaidens won't let him in, and he's like, "Oh, okay." And he comes back, still nobody will let him in. And eventually he begs to be let in, and then she's really mad at him at this point, and he and they have this big fight, and then they reconcile finally.
No.
And yes, they did experience this great swell of love afterwards, but not before she goes, this is kind of an aside, but it's kind of a funny story. She goes, "I'll take you back, but only if you give me a poem and your left pinky fingernail."
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what made her take him back. And anyway, he got what he wanted, but I really don't know if it was worth it, to be honest.
The ends do not justify the means. You know what I mean?
Not really.
I think it was kind of a long, circumvented way to get to the result there. But ultimately, throughout all of that, the thing that worked was the absence and the presence, right? So the fact that she was used to this person, and then he kind of disappeared, made her, that was the challenge that she kind of went through, and she, and made her want him even more. And so I think there's that dynamic in seduction also, that I think the story is kind of touching on a little bit where we're not talking relationships, but just the process of courting somebody. I think that there is also that delicate balance of absence and presence, and
absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say.
Yeah.
I think even if you're in a relationship, like if you're in a serious relationship, or even if you're married, a lot of people talk about how the romance has gone from their relationship. It might be worth bearing in mind that, if you intentionally isolate yourself from your partner from time to time, like throughout the day, just have your own time apart. And then when you are together later on in the day or whatever, you appreciate each other's company, because it's not like you've been with each other all day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that might, keep the romance going. And that's my free advice to all the married couples from a person who's never been married.
Yeah.
There you are.
There you go. You're welcome.
You're welcome. That is my unqualified advice. But I don't know. I think it works.
Yeah. And in general, too, this law, it mirrors kind of the Buddhist, the theory of impermanence.
Yeah.
About how, we get used to things in life because we think everything is permanent. So by realizing that everything really on earth is impermanent, you kind of appreciate them more. So I think this law has just tons of application. It's very accurate, and I think it's a very useful tool, whether it's used directly or indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, I think we already kind of covered a reversal, but if you want to go ahead and read it, that way we keep the format consistent.
Definitely. Yeah, the reversal pretty much it says that this law only works once you've attained a certain level of power. If you try to do this before reaching that power, then absence is dangerous. And so if people do not know who you are and you continually withdraw, they won't know who you are even more. So this is useful to do once you've attained some power, and it can heighten your power in that way. But if you don't have any power and you do this, then it really does nothing for you.
Yes, you must establish yourself before you can use this law, and we talked about that when we talked about Adele and other folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that seems like we're at the end here for the 48 Laws of Power podcast. I've been Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing off. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.
Listen in every Monday as we air new episodes.